Welcome to the Multifamily and More Virtual Mastermind. So happy to have you here tonight on a beautiful Wednesday up here in Michigan. We are talking tonight to an accomplished gentleman that I'll introduce here in a second. But first, I want to introduce my co-host on this side of me, Mr. Benoit Malie. Say hi, Ben.
Hey, everyone. How's it going? What's up, Jamie?
You look very slick and kind of cool with that shelving, like very, very minimalist.
It's, yeah, I guess I like to keep it that way.
That's all you got? Yeah.
Not a lot of distraction.
All right. Well, welcome everybody that's joined so far and looking forward to the others that do join here in a little bit. Let's introduce our special guest here. John Hyre is an attorney, an accountant, and investor. He spent time as tax counsel for a couple of Fortune 500 companies. Whether he knows it or not, he's actually helped me out with a couple of things a few years ago before maybe going off and getting all big time like he has. But we're going to talk about taxes, COVID, and why John lives where he lives tonight. So John, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So Ben, you want to jump in and get us kicked off with some questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're still pretty fresh in COVID, this whole COVID situation. So let's talk about that a little bit, John. It has created a lot of issues for a lot of business owners and investors. Can you maybe outline some of the challenges that you've seen, from most of your clients, and then maybe talk about some solutions?
All right. So in terms of the challenges, it's been a mixed basket. Some of them are already looking for opportunity. A lot of my clients, most of my clients are real estate investors. We do get some small businesses that are non-REI, and I actually consider them easier than dealing with real estate investors, just because particularly if you're into buy and hold, there's more complexity to the taxes, more complexity to the asset protection. But what are the challenges we're seeing? I mean, so far, my clients have mostly been getting paid on regular rentals. People are getting unemployment checks, and so there was a wait. And some of my clients, we taught them, we did a webinar on the COVID tax law, the CARES Act, back in, I think it was early April, within a week of it coming out. We did a pretty extensive webinar on that. And of course, things changed. I mean, the way you think the law is going to be when it first comes out, and what actually happens is often very different. But one of the things we pointed out to people from day one is, look, the unemployment benefits are extremely generous. They're going to take time to implement, but people are going to get retroactively paid, and they're being given a huge amount of money. I mean, between the state and the feds, it was about $850 a week average, which is a lot more than a lot of those people were making. So of course that's had a distortion on the economy. So it actually caused a backhanded problem with finding employees, because a lot of people, I mean, they're going to sit home and do the thing at home, and you can't really blame them. They're being given an incentive. Now that's changed some because the Democrats and Republicans don't agree. By the way, I mean, Jamie, you've been around me some. You know how I am.
Mm-hmm.
I assume I get to say naughty things.
Anything you want.
Oh, sweet. You should never tell me that.
Almost anything you want.
So a lot of people say there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. They're both highly imperfect. They're more similar than I would care for. But there are some very big differences. The Democrats view this as, hey, let's try and make this permanent. This is very popular. Let's pay people to sit at home. Let's pay them a lot. Yeah. And we don't even have to tax. We can just magically print money based on modern monetary theory, which is all lunacy and will be proved in a very painful manner to be lunacy. So the way I like to put it is, I did vote for Trump. I can't vote from Puerto Rico, so I'm going to send him money so he can rent votes, legally, of course. The first time I voted for him, the theory was, I prefer, between crazy and evil, with crazy I have a chance. And Trump is actually pleasantly surprising.
Yeah, that's true.
He says garbage. I mean, I don't think about what Trump says because he doesn't. So why should I?
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Most of what he's done, I agree with. So my theory this time around is, well, Trump is clearly nuts. I mean, he has narcissistic personality disorder in a way that makes Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, or Richard Nixon look like normal human beings, which really takes effort. I mean, oh my God. So he's clearly nuts, and in a very specific way. But the entire other party is nuts. All they have to do to win this election is pretend they're moderate, and they can't do it because they're not. They're not. So, do I want one lunatic, or do I want this large grouping of organized lunatics? And so for me, it's an easy decision. But coming back to then COVID, I mean, why is this relevant? Right now, there's a temporary extension of these payouts. The Democrats and Republicans could not agree. The Republicans did not want to cut the benefit, which I think is smart. Let's think about, why are they handing out money? They have to, politically, to survive. It doesn't matter at this point about ideology. If people panic, everything blows up.
Especially when your platform is all economy, right? Like if the economy tanks just before the election, then.
And just in general, though, for both parties, they know if people don't panic, the situation is salvageable.
Yeah.
If people panic, people do even dumber things than they normally do. That's like when you literally get Hitler.
Yeah.
People are scared, they don't know what's going to happen, and they do really dumb things. They stampede. So even the Democrats and Republicans agree, well, we really don't want panic. And I think they're right, by the way. I think they have to do what they're doing to keep that from happening, like it or not. Mm-hmm. Now, do I think we should have kept our powder dry and not overspent for maybe the last 60 years and actually had money, cash-like money, like normal people, to pay for things, instead of having to print money, which is going to hurt the people that the Democrats say they love? Because let's face it, if the price of bread goes up 4 times, we three can pay for it.
Yeah.
We're not the ones, we'll be hurt, but we can take the hit.
Of course, yeah.
So we probably are finally going to have inflation. Mm-hmm. With debt being artificially cheap. I always ask people a question, and I know I'm digressing a little. We'll come back.
That's okay. This is good.
If the government said, kind of like, let's say we had an economic version of the purge, and the government says, look, for 24 hours, if you could find anybody with gold, they must sell you the gold at $30 an ounce. What would you do?
Oh, I would.
You'd be hunting down people with gold and
buying and buying and buying. Yes.
It's an artificially cheap price.
Yep.
Well, that's what they've done with money.
Yeah.
Money is artificially cheap, except it's going to go on for a lot more than 24 hours and has been going on. And for a variety of reasons, they've gotten away with it. I have to admit, I was, for a long time, flummoxed, like, hey, where's the inflation? Mm-hmm. But then you look at history and see, oh, everyone else is doing this. And there are other reasons. But I think we're finally going to start feeling that.
Yeah.
And I think people who buy assets with cheap debt, there's going to be a massive wealth transfer. Mm-hmm. And it's that balancing act that's so hard, because on the one hand, common sense and tradition and prudence dictate don't have debt. Like, for example, if you own your house free and clear, you can't go bankrupt as long as you pay your property taxes, you're good.
Yeah.
So common sense and prudence, which of course the government pushes you to do the opposite and lever up, because it's a big transfer of wealth. And so then the question becomes, how much do we borrow so that we don't go bankrupt, but we do benefit from the cheapening of the debt? And by the way, my answer to that is I like double debt coverage. My net income on a rental or any other asset that I'm borrowing on, I like the net income to be double whatever the entire debt payment is. That makes me comfortable.
So you want a 2.0 debt coverage ratio is what you're saying?
Yes, sir. And it's easier said than done.
Is that in place, or is that once you reposition? You buy at a 2.0?
Right now, anything I buy, if it's going to be leveraged, it's going to be at that price. And it's hard to find. Now, I'm moving out of real estate into other things, which is a whole other, because I'm not like you guys, first of all. Let's be clear on what I am and what I'm not. I'm always very honest and blunt and rude and so on. I'm a very, very good tax lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm a very good accountant. I'm a good investor. I'm not like you guys, especially in terms of volume. I do find good deals because my clients, like I got a trillion bird dogs that actually pay me to look at their stuff. Some of the stories of how we found properties are a lot of fun.
That makes sense, yeah.
But I'm a horrible manager. I'm a terrible manager of anything, of a rehab, a rental, of an Airbnb. I'm just horrible. I don't have the time to do it. I'm bad at it. I don't like it. And I also don't like people, and it's usually pretty clear. And that contractors and tenants somehow.
So you're looking to get a 2.0 so that you can cover up for any management pitfalls or downfalls that you have in the rehab or in the repositioning?
Well, and so when we do real estate, which we did during 09 to 12, and we didn't buy nearly as much as we should have, or as some people did, but we did okay, and we're selling it. And what shocked me, what was a surprise, we were selling a few things here recently that were tied up and couldn't be sold before, and I was shocked at how high they went. And here's why, and I'm getting consistent feedback from clients that are saying things are selling for list or more because, a lot of buyers disappeared, but even more sellers disappeared. There's no inventory. Nobody wants anybody in their house, right? Because remember, most sellers own the house and live in it, and they don't want infected, so they're like, you know what, listing, that's for later. And so it's been my flippy clients, my rehab guys, even my wholesalers, my assigners, they've been doing all right. Of course, the Airbnb guys are the ones getting crushed.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Now, some of them have bounced back because you're seeing some wealthy people that want to get, for example, the hell out of New York or LA, and the ones that can telecommute. So we are seeing, to the extent people are able to reposition and target those people or have properties those people desire, I am seeing some bounce back on the Airbnbs. Otherwise, a lot of conversion to single family, or not single family, but traditional rental.
Yeah. We had a guy on, Mike Sjogren, who's the Airbnb guy, and his portfolio, and he's like, look, it wasn't like I anticipated that if COVID hit one day or something like it, but he was outside of cities, near hospitals, and I forget what else, maybe colleges or something like that. He's like, I've actually done all right. What's that?
He was retargeting essential travelers and
essential travelers, right? Yeah, and he's done all right. But to your point, a lot of people that are like looking for that, downtown Boston condo, they're not doing very well right now.
Well, and then add to it, look, between the pension problems that these socialistic cities have, some more than others, but mostly the cities, and definitely some states more than others. Illinois, California come to mind. I mean, when you pay prison guards $250,000 in retirement, that does tend to cause budget problems. And that's not an exaggeration. That's easy to Google. Also, the lack of law and order, the increasing anti-landlord movement.
Yeah.
Why would I invest in one of those areas? So if I reposition into rental real estate, and I will because I like it, it's going to be, I'm going to look for very red areas where I'm not asking for favoritism. I'm just asking that people follow the law, as in if you don't pay me, you get evicted.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty simple request.
Yeah.
That I can agree with the tenant on how much we're going to have in terms of rent, that you don't set some artificially low price on me and indirectly steal my property, which is harder to find. So I'm actually thinking about red states and actually ex-burb or other areas. I'll give you a great example from my home state. Ohio, there's a small town called Findlay, Findlay. So find lay, which I think is a noble sentiment. Clearly, what the settlers were thinking, for me, it was very clear to me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
The Marathon Oil used to have its headquarters there. They still have a big presence because there used to be a lot of oil in, of all places, Ohio, around Lima. And I worked for Marathon Oil there for a few years, only 50,000 people. Man, that is a microcosm. Between Marathon and the city fathers, and I know that's sexist, so the city mothers and the city undeterminate gender, so there, everybody can be happy now. Between those people wondering what would happen if Marathon left and creating sort of this business park and attracting business, and they're very business friendly and just solidly red. But philosophically, what does that mean? The judge will actually enforce the law. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're going to see, if BLM shows up in Findlay, the people from Findlay will probably be like, yeah, you're not from here. But then again, they knew I was. I mean, if you're not there for 3 generations, you're not from there.
Right. Sure. I know towns like that. They're
pretty calm, pretty peaceful. Probably not people I would really want to provoke. I think it would take a lot of effort. And I think once you do, you would probably regret it. Mm-hmm. That's where I want to invest.
Got it.
Niche places like that. Now, somebody had asked, I saw in the chat, what am I investing in now? Real briefly, one of the nice things about living in Puerto Rico, the networking here is insane. So you mentioned a few names.
Yeah.
Both, the Puerto Ricans, as well as the people who've come here for tax breaks. They're just some fascinating people. My problem, and bear in mind, I don't like people. Mm-hmm. My problem is there are more people for me to socialize with than I possibly could that actually do interest me, which is sort of new. I'm adapting to it.
Like Ben, yeah.
I mean, so I meet a guy, I'm smoking a cigar in Old San Juan, which is this glorious, beautiful place, and there's this guy up on a balcony. It was almost Romeo and Juliet, only not. And he had a cigar and I had a cigar, and that was like our connection.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, dude, what are you smoking? And he's like, dude, and we start talking cigars, and I was like, man, come on up, I got some booze. And I'm like, oh, cigars and alcohol, tobacco, like we're halfway there. If you've got firearms and explosives, it's perfect. So I go up and talk to this guy. It turns out he's starting a small hedge fund.
Oh, wow.
By hedge fund standards, it's small. By normal human standards. It's still respectable dough.
Yeah.
And we just got to be buddies. And it was a love fest because I got to see, he would tell me how he finds these deals. And he does all sorts of different stuff. I'm going to tell you about one in a minute. He's more the tech guy. He has 3 partners. He's more the tech guy. He built and sold a company in Silicon Valley and was there for 20 years, knows people, knows the culture, the environment, etc. So he's the guy that looks for the unicorns and knows that 9 out of 10 of the things he buys will die and 1 out of 10 will go 3 million times, and that's where you make your money.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated. I got this inside look at how do these guys operate. And it's a whole, we could do a whole separate, I could get him on. He'd probably talk to you.
Sure.
Be clear. I said I could get him on the show. I did not say I could get him off. That's totally different. Words mean things.
That's true. This is very true.
So he, on the other hand, had never really, I mean, he'd heard of it, but he never really understood the power of self-directed IRAs and 401ks. So he was fascinated. For example, I said, look, and he says, well, that doesn't help me. My friends in Silicon Valley have huge 401ks, but they don't ever leave their job. And I'm like, well, do they have a spouse that they trust? Because if they have a spouse that they trust, you can actually move a 401k from someone's day job, their W-2 job, into the spouse's self-directed IRA or spouse's self-directed 401k. But
while they're active?
Oh, yeah.
Any plan, or do plans restrict this?
The plans have no choice. It's a court order. You can do it in about 35 out of 50 states. It's a combination of federal law and how it functions at the state level. To be specific, there's something known as a quadro. Divorced people are quite familiar with what that is. Qualified Domestic Relations Order, QDRO, quadro. And what the quadro says, normally, it's normally a divorce or separation, but we're going to add a third category in a minute.
This is making sense all of a sudden. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So there's a federal order that's issued by a state domestic relations court that says, hey, the 401k is going 50% or 70% or 0% or whatever percent to the separated or divorced spouse. And it's a local court order enforceable under federal law. Mm-hmm. And so the plan really doesn't have a lot of say in the matter. Mm. They cut a check. Well, there's a third way. It's a little tiny couple of extra words in the statute that a lot of people seem to forget about. I'll loosely, I don't want to use the jargon, but let's just say you have a marital reorganization, which some states permit, some states are gray on, and some states don't permit. That's why I say like 35 out of 40 states. But if you have a financial reorganization within the marriage, and you can get the judge to do a court order saying, look, this money, and there are other reasons to do it. Let's say the spouse at the job is younger, and the spouse with the other IRA or 401k is older, and you transfer it because you want to be able to withdraw sooner. Or vice versa. Let's say the other spouse is younger and you want to put off the required distributions. Yeah. So there's a lot of flexibility and reasons, I should say, why you would do this. And you need 2 lawyers. It's rarely doable with one. Normally you need a lawyer who's familiar with how to draft a quadro. And then
John Hyre, do you know him? Yeah.
And then you also need a local domestic relations lawyer who knows how the local divorce court functions. Now, once in a blue moon, you'll find someone who knows both, but it's pretty rare.
Okay.
Usually the way it works is I'll actually draft the order and educate the lawyer on it, and then preferably use that lawyer over and over in the same state so I don't have to re-educate somebody. Yeah. And then the lawyer goes and educates the judge. And it depends on the state. In some states, for example, community property states like California and Texas, this is more known. Non-community property states, now it really depends a lot on what's the local statute say and how's the local judge going to take it. Yeah. But it is a way to move huge amounts. But man, you better get along with that spouse. Like, this is almost as bad as a Lorena Bobbitt situation. You better get along and still getting along.
I wonder if I remember Lorena Bobbitt. That's interesting. That's funny.
I remember Lorena Bobbitt because I'm married to a Latin female who reminds me frequently. Yeah, she's like, Lorena was an amateur because they could fix him.
She sounds like, Russian. Why does she sound Russian? I thought you said she was from
I got to work on the Russian accent. It's more like Lorena Bobbitt is not use battle accent, so
it's not bad.
No good.
It's not
So I
bad.
got to work on, ironically, because I do speak Spanish, but I have to work on my Latin accent more.
Makes sense. Hey, on this now, just to be clear with folks on what you just talked about, why you would move your 401k into a self-directed IRA for your spouse. For those that are unfamiliar, now like your 401k usually is restricted to 8 or 10 funds and then your company stock or
Right.
something like that.
Self-direction when you have a W-2 job is which mutual fund would you like?
Right. So now you're able to move it over.
Yeah.
And invest in real estate, invest in any stock, invest in crypto. Can you do crypto in a self-directed?
Do crypto, guns, sheep, farms, law practices, Dairy Queens. So what I'm investing in right now, back to the hedge fund guy. So I did my little diversion because I talked to him basically about the self-directed world. So he and I were looking at each other like two 15-year-olds, totally overwhelmed with hormones. I mean, it was financial lust at first sight.
Over booze and cigars. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have the same vices on top of that. The dude likes good bourbon. Hello. So one of the things that his partners do, he has two partners that used to work Goldman, and all they did was buy debt. They're really good at buying debt. So what are we buying? We are buying receivables on medical bills in Georgia. And the reason is it's a no-fault state, so your insurance is going to pay.
Yeah.
There are three variables: the doctor, the lawyer, the insurance company.
What are you buying the receivables at? Or like what percentage of the total receivables? Like how big a discount do you get on them? Does that make sense? Am I asking the right question?
Right now, from what I can tell, and we just invested in this, so I just very quietly and privately, I wanted to give it a shot. So what we did is we took what they normally do, which this is still new to them. They've done it now for 2 years. Their typical return annualized has been in the vicinity of about 60%.
I believe it. Yeah.
So they're buying the paper very cheap. And right now, because of COVID, they said they're buying even cheaper because doctors are sucking wind on cash.
Sure.
They buy from younger doctors. Because here's what happens. Typically, first of all, they pick the cases, right? If it's a huge case, like somebody got brain damage, that's going to court. You don't want to buy that one. It's going to take forever to figure out what it's going to settle for. And the discount's hard to predict. But on day-to-day stuff, you have a database. So stuff like I got whiplash.
Neck
and
back.
I treat the soft tissue injury.
Physical therapy. Yep.
$500 lien, and you could probably get it for roughly half.
Mm-hmm.
And the hedge funds haven't screwed it up by coming in and bidding it up with 2% money. I'm sure they will at some point.
Sure.
So take advantage while we can. So we're buying in states that are no-fault insurance. These guys have a doctor on staff who evaluates the injury, and they also have analysts who evaluate the lawyers and the insurance companies and the historical record. Now, this appeals to real estate investors because I brought a few in as co-investors just for fun, a few friends, all real estate investors. Why does it appeal to them? They understand paper. They understand paper and discounts and liens. The insurance company's gonna pay.
Mm-hmm.
You look at your matrix of the lawyer, the company, and the doctor, and these people have a pretty good idea of when are they gonna pay and how much. And so we persuaded them. I said, look, first of all, we're not looking at a pref div. We want to cut. We want 50%. Second, in order for it to work for an IRA, we're going to structure it as a shared appreciation mortgage. In other words, the danger of the IRA directly investing in debt, the IRS could look at it one of two ways. And I think the good way is more likely, but not 100%. The good way for the IRS to look at this methodology is you bought this thing, this piece of paper, you bought it for appreciation, which is a good reason because that makes it a capital asset, and that's what IRAs normally invest in, and you're good. The other way they could look at it, especially if you do it in volume, and especially if the underlying people take actions to collect, they could say, no, this is an ongoing trade or business. This is really a collection business. And that would be subject to UBIT, which is a tax on IRAs. It's very high tax, 37% at the federal level plus the state stuff. And then the IRA is not tax exempt, which kind of screws things up.
Yeah.
And to avoid that risk, we do this with a lot of deals. For example, when people joint venture with flippers, they use their IRA to provide money and JV with a flipper. Same issue. Is the flipper guy's trade or business going to be attributed to your IRA and cause a UBIT problem? Same issue. And so the way we get around that is I have done a lot of research. I think I have read every single tax court case on shared appreciation mortgages, AKA participating debt. And so we instead, this outfit set up an LLC, we lent it, the group lent it money. There's a note, there's a due date, et cetera, and the interest rate is 50% of the profit. And of course, we have to be very careful how we define profit so that we don't get nailed on, oh, well, we paid ourselves to consult. It was $1 million. Sorry, there's no money for you. So, of course, you define things very carefully. But what's the benefit? The IRS looks at that as interest, as long as the note is properly drafted. Here's the key. You can't allow the note to look like a partnership in disguise.
Oh,
Because the IRS looks at the substance, not what you actually wrote on paper. They look at the substance. So we had I'll give you an example. If one of the lenders on the note says, well, I want to vote on where the money is being invested. No, that's what LLC partner member types do.
Yeah.
You may have, for example, what would a bank normally do? There could be a draw account for rehab, and you have to approve the rehab. That's normal with debt. So you kind of think through what's normal with debt and what's not. And we want it to look and act like debt. And there's case law on what looks and acts like debt. So the bottom line is we're collecting interest, an awful lot of it, but we are collecting interest. So then you have to consult a lawyer at the local level and make sure it's what? Not usury.
Right.
And then if it is usury, you got to find a way to structure around it. So I went off on this bunny trail.
This is good. No, because actually Ben and I are talking about this right now with the self-directed. So this is really good. I appreciate you talking through that. But a couple of things that you brought up, and I want to come back to you with.
Back on track.
With the that's okay. This is great. Like we got modern monetary theory that we could talk about. You talk about things changing with the tax code with COVID, but on the self-directed IRA piece for a moment. Can you talk about, and relating it to COVID, can you talk about, I've heard, and I could be wrong on this, that there are some exemptions or what's the word I'm looking for? That there are some nuances now with COVID where you can withdraw from an IRA without being penalized and all that. Can you talk a little bit about some of those benefits? Yeah,
let me give you the two big changes to IRAs and 401k. So we have the CARES Act, which was the COVID response. If you are I forget what term they use. Here, let me look. Wait a minute. I have a PowerPoint up just so I could look it up because I don't memorize terms.
Or people.
I memorize like bigger picture things. But let me find it. I actually did, like I said, a presentation on all this. And so I remember the big picture. A qualified individual, there's the term. See, I have no memory for proper nouns. If you're a qualified individual, and I'm not going to define that here. Let's just say loosely, a qualified individual is someone who's been adversely affected by COVID, which is pretty much everybody. Right. Now, they have specific definitions, and they actually just updated it and made it a lot more liberal than it was. Wow. If you're a qualified individual, you had COVID, a relative had COVID, daycare was shut down, you had to watch kids, you lost business volume, you lost work hours. I mean, there's a huge number of things that make you a qualified individual. If you are one, that allows you to do two things. Normally, from a qualified plan, so not an IRA, a qualified plan like a 401k, normally you can borrow $50,000 or 50% of the balance, whichever is less. Well, for 2020, if you're a qualified individual, you can borrow $100,000 or 100% of the balance, whichever is less. But let's talk about, so you can do that. The plan documents do need to be adapted. But the Congress was very generous. My recollection is they gave people 2 to 3 years to amend their plan docs. If you're dealing with an employer, you got to find out if they're going to do that. Do you have an intention to amend your docs, or have you already done so? Now, if you have a solo 401k, or you have a small business type 401k, because there are some non-solo 401ks for small businesses where they're employees, then you're the plan provider. Somebody probably provided you the plan, and you have to give them a call and say, hey, I want you to amend this to allow me to do this. Are you going to do that? And the better providers will do it. But before we talk about, so that's one. You can take more of a loan than would normally be permitted, $100,000 roughly.
Longer than the 4 years or whatever they allow to pay it back to, or is it the same?
The payment period's still the same 5 years, but you are allowed to have 1 year in abeyance.
Okay.
Now let's talk about, so you can do this. The question is, should you? Well, I can only think of two reasons to do this, because for you to normally I'm trying to help you put a bunch of money into a Roth 401k or IRA. We have a lot of ways to do that. Why? Because it's a tax-free environment. We prefer that. So for you to take money out of a tax-free environment, into the cold, hostile, taxable world, there are only two reasons I can think of to do that. One, you really do need the money badly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean need. I mean need.
Right.
Or you have a deal that's really good that your 401k would not be allowed to do. Just to make up a stupid, simple example, my mother is willing to sell me a house at half fair market value. Now, my mom would never do that, but someone else's mom is willing to sell the house at half a fair market value. Well, you can't, the 401k is not allowed to do that deal. She's a disqualified person. It cannot buy anything from a disqualified person. So if you've got a deal that's really good and you cannot do it because of the rules inside the 401k, okay, I could see pulling the money out.
Sure.
Or true need. But would I otherwise do that? No, that hurts me. That pains me, because now you're going to pay tax, and I'm philosophically and professionally and financially against that.
Mm.
The other change in the law because of the CARES Act that affects IRAs and 401ks, you're allowed to take up to $100,000 distribution. And by the way I presently read the law is from your IRA and from your 401k. It's not a combination, they're separate. You could pull 100 from each is the way I presently read the law as a distribution. And you got two options with the distribution. If you pay the distribution back within 3 years, or you pay the distribution, this is important, the wording, or you pay the distribution to an account that you could have rolled the old account over into. That's key. For example, if I pull money out of my W-2 job account, can I roll that to a self-directed IRA? Generally not. There are exceptions, but generally not. Which means I can't pay the money back to a self-directed IRA unless I could have done it anyway, unless I could have rolled it from the 401k anyway. So you have 3 years to pay the money back to the account, the 401k or the IRA, or to an account that you could have rolled into based on existing rules. If you do that, the IRS pretends it was a 60-day rollover. So it's really just another loan.
Yeah, no kidding.
Minus the interest, minus the payments.
Yeah.
Or you treat it as a distribution and they give you 3 years to pay the taxes prorated. So they just divide the tax hit over 3 years minus the 10% early withdrawal penalty. They're waiving that. And you pay the tax over 3 years. So you got a choice.
So let me be clear on that first one real quick. I'm going to just give the simple example. Somebody sees a, $50,000 house with $40,000 worth of rehab with an ARV of 200, right?
Repeat.
Yep, 50,000 purchase, 50,000 ARV, so 100,000 total with the $200,000 after repair value, right?
Okay.
And they want to get that thing and they need the money. They can go, you're saying, to their 401k. They can either take a loan and pay it back over 4 or 5 years, or they can withdraw it, do all that, refi, take the money and put it back in the account before 3 years and pay nothing in between now and then.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thank you
As
for
long
being.
as you're a qualified person or whatever the term was.
Well, my wife is not able to work at the gym like she normally does because of COVID. So
Done.
we filed jointly.
Done.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. That's crazy. And that's how long is that in effect for?
2020.
Just for the year. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's huge. That's a big deal. And then you mentioned the other side of that is you can take the distribution from, say you have 30,000 in an IRA, you can take the 30,000 out and pay it back. No penalty, but you pay the tax, 1/3 of the tax this year, 1/3 of the tax next year, 1/3 of the tax two years from now.
That's right. And that works with an IRA or a 401k. Yep.
Interesting. Okay. But to your point, why do that second one, right? If you have the first option, I would think, right?
So here's what I would say. Why would you not do the flip you described inside the account and grow it tax-free?
That's true too. It's a good point.
Now, the answer would be, well, I need the money. Okay, that's a fair answer, but truly, again, need.
Yeah.
We spend so much time trying to bulk up these accounts. One of the most common questions I get, and we spend hours on it, how do I make a small retirement account into a huge retirement account? And then you go pulling money out of it.
Right.
So if it's a deal that for some reason can't be done in the account, I get it.
Makes sense.
Okay.
What else
Wow.
you got? What else you want to talk about?
Geez. So, okay. So we covered those two things. All right. What things changed? So let's talk real quick. You did a webinar on the wartime plan for COVID, and that's available at, what's your website? JohnHyre.com?
IRAlawyer.com is where I usually send people, but that directs people to taxreductionlawyer.com, and we're playing right now. I've got a guy that does advertising and all for me. I'm thinking of resplitting the sites up, but the easiest one to remember is IRAlawyer.com or realestatetextlaw.com, and they both go to taxreductionlawyer.com. So let me get on there and see if I even still have the product up.
You do. It's at the bottom.
Oh, I do? Okay, cool. So people can still get it. All right, good. Then you know my website better than I do. It tells you what I'm good at. Like, I'm a really good tax geek, and pretty much everything else I suck at.
That's okay. But so talk about, you said a couple things changed. What's changed?
All right, so the course is cheap. Here's the good news. We went through in detail a bunch of CARES Act, COVID, wartime tax breaks. Almost everything I talk in there is still current, and a lot of it people are missing. I'm going to give you an example in a minute. There are two things that changed, and I didn't even bother to keep up with it. It changed so fast. So the triple P, the PPP program, the forgivable loan, as well as the EIDL loans, both of those have changed so much. The SBA was changing that like by the hour, that it no longer resembles the law as it was written, which is what I described on that webinar. So those two items on the webinar are obsolete. Everything else is pretty much current. It's funny, we got a lot of calls. We took a little business and stopped doing it. We had people calling us for PPP and EIDL loan, can you fill out the applications and consultations and all? And we stopped doing it. I decided it was a bad fit for the business. In other words, I could bill more to do other things, and there's a limited amount of time. And of course, I'm going to, like anyone else, go with what makes me profit. Those were just not high profit items. The other reason you haven't seen a lot of information content since the webinar. So I'm really good when a big law comes out, like the Trump tax law or the COVID law, usually within a week, I'll have it not only laid out in detail, but how it affects real estate investors in detail. We had like 1,300 people on each of those webinars, and that's from me, I'm a horrible marketer. Next time I'll pay someone and get 10,000 people. So the reason I've not put out more information content on EIDL and PPP is there's no value added for me to do that. In other words, I'm really good at catching stuff other people don't catch. But I have to say, there's been a lot of really good, constantly updated, tons of content on what SBA is doing with PPP and EIDL. Lots of good content. And so there's not a lot of value for me to add. I will say one thing. I think a lot of people have been very sloppy, and a lot of people have given the government, if they ever come into a prosecutor's crosshairs for any reason and they want to have something to get you, this is it. In other words, under PPP and EIDL, you sign under penalties of perjury, federal perjury, like General Flynn type federal perjury, not like Clinton perjury, because if you're Clinton, you cannot commit perjury. It's impossible. It doesn't matter what you say.
That's true.
This is the gotcha thing, right? So how do we define need the money? Well, later on they came and said, if your company is able to access funds through raising stock or maybe debt, or maybe you just have money somewhere else, you don't need the money. Are there a lot of people who took the money that really didn't need it? They just kind of figured, easy money. I've been paying taxes, they're handing out money, sign me up. Fine print. I'll give you another example. On the EIDL loans, you're not allowed to take a distribution from the company. Look at the loan docs. On the EIDL loans, you are not allowed to take, somebody just made a great one, with apologies to President Clinton, that depends on what your definition of perjury is. That's a good one.
Very good, Dave,
So, where was I? The entrepreneur ADD, it went away.
EIDL loan, you can't take a distribution.
That's okay. You can't take a distribution. You got to pay the loan back. Look at the loan doc. And people that get stupid, well, it was a salary bonus that just happened to be all of the company's profit. You're an idiot if they ever catch you, and they probably won't, but if they do, you're dead. So, and I don't know, in our society, I am noticing a trend towards, let's see, if I criticize BLM, I could get fired. If I criticize Trump, I won't get fired.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very close friend who works for a Fortune 500 company, big Trump supporter. He won't give Trump money. He says if they find out at this Fortune 500 company, he will never advance again.
Mm-hmm.
It will be understood because it's all public record.
Sure.
So we're heading for a society where if you upset somebody who matters, and they can find something.
That's the something, right?
Oh, I didn't take it. You know what? Even though for my speaking business, even though my travel, of course, went away.
Sure.
So I can show some harm. I read the strings attached. I read what I had to sign under penalties of perjury. I didn't want the free money. It wasn't worth it.
That's fair. That's fair.
So a lot of people, I think, maybe that's a little too conservative, but I know a lot of people who went the other way and they were just like,
yeah, grab. I do too, unfortunately. And to your point, I did hear later that there were some, like you just described it much better, but some clarifications that made it like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have spent that money right now. Like,
and if there's any doubt, like someone's hearing this right now, and let's just say need to change the old undies.
Yeah.
Give it back.
Yeah.
Just freaking give it back. Stop the harm.
Yep, that's a good point. So there's a lot in that webinar at taxreductionlawyer.com. We put it up in there. There's a lot in that webinar that will be covered, and I would direct people to that. And also, just on your site, you got a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of info that people can get if they go check out.
It's going to get better. Because here's the problem. Here's the catch-22. I produce great content. Why? Because I actually do what it is I write about. But doing what I write about takes a lot of time and limits how much time I have to produce content. It's funny because right before I came here, I talked to my Cuban guy, Hector the marketer. And Hector the marketer is displeased with me, which he probably should be. So after the tax return deadline of September 15th, I have agreed to go into the hills of Puerto Rico, rent an Airbnb to just have a different environment. And I'm going to spend 2 weeks putting together a self-directed IRA 401k course that's completely online. I did a lot of them live. But I do them live as in like this, kind of just flow of consciousness. This will actually be an organized thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I've done that, but he's really pushing me to do this. And there's not a lot of people out there who do that topic well. And then there are other topics. We've got, the bookkeeping course. It's relevant, but it's dated. I mean, the jokes in there are about the old Clinton, not even the newer Clinton, much less whatever we've got now. And so the material's good because bookkeeping doesn't change. It's been the same since 1490 something, whenever they invented it, right around when Columbus sailed.
Sure.
But I do have to give that a little bit of a facelift. So we're working on content, but we've got stuff on there. We've got a 401k webinar, for example, I did with Dorsey Bodiford. It is totally relevant still. 8 hours of strong content, $300. My God, I charge $500 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot cheaper to watch that and then talk to me later on the little details you missed.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Appreciate the promo.
Of course. We've got 15 minutes left before the top of the hour, and I want to talk about
Wait, this is only an hour?
a topic. Oh, you want to go longer? We can. It's up to you.
Oh, I'm just not used to ones that short. It's your deal. So you go as long as you want. At some point, I'll fall off. But if you want to go a little longer, let's do it.
Cool. I'm good with that. So let's talk about this real quick thing, because there's actually beyond this, there's even more topics that I want to get into if we can. On our page right now, on our Multifamily More page, we got a guy named Marcos Jacober who's on there talking about tax liens and tax deeds. What's unique about Marcos to some extent is he lives in Puerto Rico. Sitting here right now with you, John Hyre, attorney from Ohio, you live in Puerto Rico. John Lee Dumas, we talked about, if anybody's ever heard of the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast, lives in Puerto Rico. I don't want to call you expats because this is an American territory, but essentially, why are mainlanders...
Sure.
Right. Why are mainlanders like you moving in droves to the island that Maria blew away?
Let me give you a couple reasons, because there's more than one. The first one that brought me here was the tax incentive, for sure. So there are different tax incentives. For example, if you provide a service from Puerto Rico, and you have to physically be here providing the service from here, like, say, tax consulting, hypothetically.
Let's just go with that. Yeah.
If you're exporting that service, meaning someone outside Puerto Rico is paying for it, you get a special deal, because if you live in a U.S. territory, you don't pay federal income tax on income earned in the territory. Now, if I fly to Ohio and bill hours, I got to pay U.S., Ohio, and Puerto Rico tax. So as you might imagine, I don't bill from Ohio very often.
Makes sense.
So if I bill from here, here's what it boils down to. My tax rate, it's advertised as lower, but when you do the math, my tax rate here is about 6% flat. Federal, state, local, everything combined.
6% of your income is taxed. That's it. How?
Because, so Code Section 933 says if you're a bona fide resident of a U.S. territory, the idea was to give the territories independence. So people in the territories, like Puerto Rico and Guam and the Mariana Islands and so on, don't pay federal tax. Why? Because the federal government says we're not going to collect on your people. Since you're not a state, which kind of sucks for you in some ways, we're going to give you something in exchange. We're going to let you collect way more money than you normally would. You're going to have a lot more fiscal independence. So actually, Puerto Rico's normal tax rates are higher than the U.S. Puerto Rico is majorly socialist. I mean, if you look at how Puerto Ricans in the U.S. vote, it's all commie. And I love Puerto Ricans except for their politics and their ideology, which, but in order to attract people here, because they've driven a lot of people away, they said, all right, if you come here and provide, if you export service, and there are other examples, this is just one. If you export a service or even a product, as long as you don't compete with the locals, that's why you have to export it and be paid by someone from outside.
Yeah.
For example, a guy that attended my webinar and seminar recently, in fact, we're doing a webinar next week, he's this Amazon genius. This dude, what he does, he goes and looks on Amazon. He has, I think, software that searches for products that in the product category, so not just the product, but this entire category of products, like say, I do martial arts. I do Philippine Kali with sticks, knives, and dirty boxing. So they have special bags to carry our sticks. Let's say everybody does a crap job on making the stick bag, real specialized product. He looks for things where the entire product category gets 3 stars. And then he goes out and makes a 5-star product and sells it. That's freaking genius.
Yeah, no kidding.
That is genius.
Yeah.
And it's all virtual. So he's just drop shipping stuff from China. So he's actually moving here, and now he just bought a house. So you export things from here, you get the rate. The other people, like the note guys, there are a bunch of discounted note guys, which would include the tax lien guys, a bunch of hard money guys. There's a different Puerto Rican law that says interest income earned in Puerto Rico is taxed at 0%. Well, okay, if I make you a loan in the United States, the way it works for tax law, for federal tax law, I lend you money, you pay me interest from the U.S. That is considered U.S. source income. So you might be thinking, well, then how does it help that Puerto Rico won't tax it? Well, when you are a bona fide resident of Puerto Rico, you have the capacity for certain parts of the tax code to become a foreigner. You are considered for certain parts of the tax code a foreigner. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. If you structure correctly, you can become a foreigner for purposes of lending into the United States. Why is that good? There's a concept called portfolio interest under U.S. international tax law. Portfolio interest. Okay. It won't make it'll come up with a lot of bad Google hits unless you throw in U.S. international income tax law as part of the Google search, and then portfolio interest. You might add tax-free. If you're considered a foreigner and you lend in a certain manner, way too little time to go into the details, but it's not that hard to do. If you lend into the U.S. as a foreigner, the U.S. will not tax it if you lend in the right way. Why? Why would they do that? They want to attract capital, right? Investment capital coming into the U.S. is generally considered good. They don't tax portfolio interest. If you're a bona fide resident of Puerto Rico, can you structure it so that you're lending into the U.S., and that would include buying discounted notes, is deemed to be portfolio interest, so the U.S. won't tax it.
Okay.
And you have a deal with Puerto Rico, that's Act 22, that says Puerto Rico won't tax it. So yeah, we got a lot of discounted note guys and some pretty massive hard money lenders here. And
what about real estate investors? Like somebody that owns a bunch of property in the U.S. I mean, is that?
Okay, so here's how that normally works. I mean, given the present tax law, if you have rental properties and you're paying tax, we need to talk.
That's a good point.
Second, the way we normally structure that is you pay yourself a management fee. So I have properties in the U.S. Let's say they're depreciated out and they're free and clear. And even with all the great new tax laws, I still end up paying some tax.
Yeah.
You move to Puerto Rico, You manage from Puerto Rico, you charge a fee. Now here's the catch. You want the fee to be as high as possible because the fee is a service provided from Puerto Rico, taxed at 6%. It's a deduction against your US income. That's all a good thing. But you can't just make up a fee. Oh yeah, my fee happened to equal my profits this year. Oh, nice. Good luck with that. You gotta, sometimes if there's enough money involved, you get a study done and you have somebody say, well, here's what people charge, especially really high net worth, smart people who are really good at managing. Here's what they would charge. And so you justify a price. And Benoit, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on the amount of time to be in Puerto Rico. It depends on what you're doing. Okay. Let me give you the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is you really have to be here most of the time. It depends on what you do. Like what people say is 183 days. In some cases, that's true. You would have to manage it very carefully. I probably wouldn't cut it that close. I'd get closer to 200 days first off. And I mean clearly 200 days, no gray days. And second, it depends on the nature of what you do. I'll give you an example. Actually, it's an example I already gave you. If you're in Puerto Rico to provide a service, only the days that you're in Puerto Rico providing the service get the favorable tax rate. If you provide that service from anywhere else, you lose the break. So if you're a service provider like me, you live here most of the year, which by the way, good Lord, you want to talk about the media lies? Look, I appreciate the compassion, guys. Every time that the media says, like, we had this tropical storm that missed us.
I wanted to ask you about this. Yes, go. Yeah.
It freaking missed us. This was like a week and a half ago. So we had heavy thunderstorms, and the infrastructure here is fragile due to corruption and socialism and culture. So for about a day, some people in San Juan didn't have power, but everybody has a generator because everyone here is a prepper or else, because just the incompetence and the corruption. And everybody has a cistern, or most people do, and they just manage. So for a day, some people were inconvenienced. Now, if you have money, you live in a building that has really good infrastructure, really good, like my building, the generators never went out during Maria, ever. Granted, my building is nice and there are some connected people here. So it's like, oh, do you need diesel? Yeah. We got, so okay, cool. I want to live in that place.
Again, these Russians, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's different. I got to work on the accents. The voices in my head sometimes get confused.
Wasn't bad.
I'll practice it.
But that's what I want to ask you. So like people think, so the tax advantages of Act 20, Act 22, 4% that you could pay on your money. It's unbelievable on your income. But what is living in Puerto Rico like? Like, so you get up in the morning and is it like, oh my God, things are stolen? Like you hear, like you said, real quick backstory. I remember going to New Orleans after Katrina, and you would have thought New Orleans wasn't there anymore from what you saw covered on the news, right? But then you get there, it's like, okay, over there is tragically damaged, right? Ninth Ward, all that stuff. People lost lives, property, the whole nine. But it's like, it's this, like New Orleans was there. It was fine. I'm assuming a little bit similar with.
As in most places, money solves an awful lot of problems. If you have enough money that the act is relevant to you, that the Puerto Rican tax savings are a major factor for you, you have enough money, first of all, to buy your way around a lot of the problems. Now, there are issues. Let's talk about both. Let me tell you an unexpected upside. And it's such an upside that, let's say Puerto Rico, for some reason, lost the ability to give me a tax break, and I paid normal federal taxes, not Puerto Rican regular taxes. I would leave. I would not pay that. Let's say I had to pay normal federal taxes. Would I stay? I would be here 6 months of the year. I love this place. I live in Old San Juan. I can see the cruise ships from where I'm at, my building. I'm walking distance to a ton of restaurants and bars and dance clubs, these beautiful streets. The ocean is right next to me in the form of a harbor, or about 7 blocks north of me in the form of the Atlantic Ocean, because we're on a little peninsula. I have calmed down so much. Like a lot of tax lawyer accountant types, I'm a little bit maybe tightly wound. Man, this place has been better than Prozac and Quaaludes combined. There's something in the air and something about the people. I love the people here. First of all, the Puerto Ricans, I hate their politics. I detest their ideology. I detest their politics. And I'm usually not real shy about that. But them, they're the nicest, friendliest, most helpful. They're like aggressively friendly. You'd never go to lunch with a Puerto Rican on a weekday because you ain't going back to work.
Just
I mean, they know how to
tostones till you die.
they know how to enjoy life. They're fun. They're vibrant. If you show any interest in the culture, they will open their arms to you. They will be so welcoming and friendly and helpful. They're very proud of their island. They're aware of the flaws, and you have to diplomatically discuss the flaws. You have to be careful because they're very proud.
Sure.
Now, what are the downsides? If you're a type A, tightly wound person, which I normally am, things getting done here, it's a cluster. Even by Latin standards, let's just say they're very laid back about getting things done. The government here is enormously corrupt and incompetent, and it's a magical combination. I mean, it makes Chicago, California, and New Orleans governance look modern and light and efficient. But you pay people to deal with that. Again, if you make enough money to deal with to save taxes, you pay someone to help you get your driver's license, a couple $100. Just my time's worth more than that. Somebody's like, Chicago's really taking it on the chin tonight. Deservedly so. I wonder how many people died there. But anyway, just during the course of our talk. But anyway, so I love the people here. And then the Act 2022 people, man, that's Darwin at work. Think about it. Here's some rough math. For Act 20, what I do to be worthwhile compared to moving to Florida. So it's not compared to where I live, it's compared to where could I move. Compared to moving to Florida where there's no state income tax. Dave's a funny guy. He's like, I'm going to go check on my wife and kids just in case. That's awesome.
I know Dave, fellow lawyer, so I think you guys have this thing going on. Yeah.
You need to not live near Cabrini Greens. Just help us help you, like out west by a Lombard and all those yuppie places. But anyway, and now it's got me thinking in a different ADD direction, because now I'm thinking Portillo's, because Portillo's is a good Chicago thing. But anyway, so the Act 2022 people here, for Act 20, doing what I do, if you want to save $100,000 a year in taxes compared to, I hit it right on the head. He grew up in Lombard, lives 10 minutes south. Boom.
Got it. Portillo's. There you go.
So God invented Portillo. Thank you.
I gotta look this up.
God doesn't have to deal with the consequences of me eating too much Portillo's now. That's my job. Back on track. No, focus. So in order for it to be worth moving here, compared to, say, living in Florida, which I'll talk in a minute, what do I miss about this, about living in the States? Because this is part of the United States, but it's not a state. So living in a state, what do I miss? I'll get into that. If you make $500,000 a year, you would save about $100,000 in Puerto Rico compared to Florida. And for me, that was a minimum. For me to move to Puerto Rico, because it does have some issues. There are some downsides. Or just to be away from family and so on. I was going to say be away from friends, but I'll tell you, I've made so many friends here, and I'll come back to that, the Darwinian nature of the Act 2022 people who move here. So my opinion is, compared to Florida, I got to save $100,000 a year to move here. To do that, you got to be making about $500,000. Now, with the note people, it's a little bit different because the note people pay $0. So for them to save $100,000 is a little bit easier compared to the 6% I pay. It's advertised as 4%, but it's really, when you factor other things in, it's more like 6%. The Act 2022 people, so the entrepreneurs who actually come here and actually stay, and they got to be here at least a year before we consider them possibly permanent. Because a lot of people don't do their due diligence. They show up and it's like not a good fit for them. Look, the infrastructure is run down. It's not as bad as they say on the news. The hurricanes, the so-called earthquakes, oh my God. What a bunch of twats on the news. They hurt Puerto Rico. They hurt Puerto Rico. Because the earthquakes hit every 100 years, and they come as, here's a scary word, are you ready? A swarm, an earthquake swarm. Well, let's think that through. A bunch of tiny little earthquakes, that's one way to release energy. Sure. Or we can release all the energy at once.
Yeah. I'll take the swarm.
Yeah, swarm.
Swarm me. Yeah.
So what do? During the high season here, the high tourist season, we had our Airbnb subleased for $1,000 a night for this 4-day festival. everybody disappeared because the media said the earthquakes. And then people showed up. We talked some real estate investors that were coming to a convention. I talked sense into them, like, no, don't listen to the media. They're scum. Come down. I'm here during the earthquake swarm, and I can leave, and I haven't, and it's okay. You might feel a slight tremor. If you're drinking enough, you'll wonder if it's you or the earth. So there's just so much exaggeration, but there are issues. The infrastructure here is a mess. Like, I would never buy a really nice car here unless you have like military suspension artificially grafted to it.
Yeah.
Crime is an issue. So there are, like, Old San Juan, I don't worry. Why? Because the tourists come here. If a tourist gets mugged, the government loses money. The government protects its revenue. Ergo, police are all over the place in Old San Juan.
Yep.
Outside of here, there are some nicer areas. You still have to be on condition yellow. You got to watch yourself. So stuff's run down. They're not as bad as the Bay Area with the homeless people, but they're not as good as Worthington, Ohio, where I lived for 25 years. So they permit enough of that I dislike it, but there's not feces and needles in the streets, and there aren't dozens of these guys asking for money. It's like most of Latin America, a lot of petty larceny. The gun deaths are very high, but like most places, it's almost all drug related, and you know where to go and not go. And here's my rule. I can go anywhere in the day, even the projects, which Puerto Rico did what the Democrats are suggesting to do, and of course calling anyone who disagrees with them a racist, right? They put out some HUD regulations because they couldn't pass an honest law through the legislature in a republic. So they just do regulations, which are also known as essentially dictatorship, saying that you must have high density housing in the suburbs and the feds dictate it, and you must share your school funds with all the other schools. In other words, no more suburbs. And that's not an exaggeration. I can send you to articles. It's amazing to me how ignorant real estate investors are of this. That these regulations that Trump just struck down, by the way, were put in at the last minute by Obama. It's a typical dirty political trick for the Democrats to put awful regulations in. And then if the Republican president gets rid of them, he's a racist. And if he keeps them, he's bound to them. It sucks either way. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. This is not hyperbole. They're looking to ban the suburbs. They're looking to annex the suburbs, and those regulations allow it. If you want to see how that works out, come to Puerto Rico. They did it in the 50s. They put the caseríos, which are the projects. I'm sorry, high density housing.
HDH, yes.
They put the projects in all the nice neighborhoods because it would uplift the poor.
Yeah.
And if you disagree, you're a racist. And what did they do? Crime is everywhere. Drug people everywhere. So I am pretty careful about where I go at night. There's enough nice areas, and I just stick to those areas. But do you watch yourself? Yeah. And if you're one of these people who doesn't have that sense, so I have an edge too. I'm part Latin. I grew up speaking Spanish. My wife's from Chile. But see, in Chile, unlike Puerto Rico, they actually have nice neighborhoods with just nice houses and no projects. And so you can go there, and for the most part, it's not that bad. And then there are places that are obviously not that.
Sure.
This reminds me somewhat of New Orleans, but way more so. It's block by block in a lot of places. Block by block.
Yeah. Detroit. So
the inefficiency will drive some people nuts. The infrastructure. What do I miss the most? It's little things. I miss Whole Food. Can you get? My wife's here making comments, so we're gonna have to now bring in the Chilean. It's like in Clash of the release the Kraken. Bring in the Chilean.
So you miss Whole Foods, you said.
I miss Whole Foods, and I go there in spite of the hippies. Because I like the stuff I was evolved to eat. So do I think GMOs are bad? I don't really know. Could they be? Yeah. Could they also be the best thing that feeds the world cheaply? Sure. Can I afford to eat stuff I was evolved to eat? Yes. Do I therefore do that? Yes. Is there more of that? Or is that's harder to find here? Here, you really have to get hooked into like one of the farmers that sells to retail. There's a name for that. Those farms that do that. Yeah. Or they'll deliver all that sort of thing.
I forget what they're called, but yes.
Yeah. I miss Barnes and Noble.
Well, so do I right now. They're all closed.
Barnes and Noble, since they're closing. I mean, I miss Lifetime Fitness. It's hard to find a gym that nice here.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, thank God for Costco. There are 3 of them on the island, and thank God, because they really kind of set the standard for a lot of things.
Sure.
So this is not the retail paradise. Things cost more. They need to be imported, and they have a high sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to what I'm saving on income tax,
Yeah.
Maps. Oh my! So navigating here, driving here.
Oh, I'll bet.
So first of all, whoever designed the highways was the same guy. Who was the guy, the Escher? The Escher paintings that kind of like that they go like the stairwell that never ends.
Oh, yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
That's the highways here. I mean, so first of all the exits, like you'll see these exits where there are 3 exits within 10 yards of each other. And it confuses the shit out of Google Maps or whatever it is you're doing to navigate.
Yeah.
It doesn't know where to tell you to go. And then, of course, Puerto Rican government, being Puerto Rican government, the palm tree has grown to cover the sign that has the exit number. Now, think about that, how long it's been there.
Yeah.
No movement of the sign, no chopping down of the tree.
Right,
You
right.
kind of have to know that's where you get off. So the first time here, how they drive is definitely Darwinian. I mean, they do make up for it. So they do random things. For example, horizontal crossing of the highway at 60.
Oh.
U-turns anywhere, and I mean anywhere. Like 3 lanes, that's enough for a U-turn. Meridian without, barbed wire and concrete, boom, U-turn, hello. Stop, back up into the meridian and do a U-turn. Sure, why the hell not? So they do random stuff, but I do have to say, Puerto Rican drivers are Spider-Man. They have the reflexes and the spider sense. Like, I'm now used to, there's stuff I would look at and say, someone's about to die. I'm sitting here from behind from my vantage point, and I see what's happening in front of me. And, oh, someone's about to die. And nope, they didn't die. I'll be damned. Because if I were any of the drivers involved, somebody would have died. And so I'm starting to get better. I remember the first time back in the States after being here a while, I forgot to not drive like a Puerto Rican. And yeah, I got beeped out a lot.
Got a little nutty?
Yeah, no, I mean, people expect you in the States, like, red lights, you stop, and all this crazy authoritarian fascist.
Quick Dominican story. I remember this when I went with my wife. We were going to Santo Domingo from Higüey, the city she grew up in, and there's a highway, actually a very nice highway that was just put in, right? And I see this dude on a moped, like on the shoulder, and he's got a washing machine on the back of it, and he's just like you said, like Spider-Man. He's like latched onto this washing machine, going like 30 miles an hour on the shoulder, and then it started raining, and you could see his face like, you got to be kidding me! I just got this washing machine. The poor guy, but I couldn't believe he was just like holding a washing machine on the back fender of his dirt bike, going down the shoulder of the highway. Blew my mind.
Here, you either drive extremely aggressively, like you go, or you freaking stop and let everyone go. What will get you killed is to hesitate.
Yeah, of course, right. Yeah, you can't do that. You have to move. So, hey, real quick, I want to touch on, because we can go on this for a while, but I want to touch on something you talked about earlier for the last part of this. And any questions people have, jump in, although it looks like you got a little Russian plug from Dave there, so you sounded Russian.
I'm getting better.
You talked about modern monetary theory. It kind of relates to quantitative easing and all that good stuff. And I don't know how deep you want to get in this. It's not necessarily tax related unless you can relate it to taxes, but can you talk about a little bit? Oh, somebody actually had a question here. We'll get to that. Can you talk about a little bit your take on, well, what is modern monetary theory? You kind of defined it earlier, but can you expand on that a bit? And I don't know, the value of investing or holding cash in other assets other than cash, like gold or whatever the case. Can you just espouse some thoughts on?
Dude, here's what kills us. It's the timing, right? So modern monetary theory, I giggle and laugh so much when I try to read it seriously. It'd be like, and plus I end up having to read Paul Krugman, which always makes me want to vomit. And so giggling while vomiting is just a bad mix.
Not a good look.
But the basic concept is things are now different, right? You know how everyone says this time is different, and then we all laugh and we're like, no, history and human behavior all repeat themselves. No, this time is different. The nature of money has changed. What it basically says is we can print as much as we want.
All we want.
And there's no impact. And the reason they're now saying that is they've been getting away with it for quite some time. But there are some contributing factors. We have lived in an age of wonder. So I do wake up every morning here in Puerto Rico with a sense of gratitude. Thank God I wasn't born 150 years ago, even as a king.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather be me today than a king, even 100 years ago.
I'll give you that. Yeah.
And in the States, as screwed up as we are, and as hard as we're trying to screw things up, for the past 50 years at least, we have had a very deflationary economy.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? We have become so much more efficient. We can produce so much more with so much less. It used to take 7 people to feed 8. Now 1% of the population feeds everybody. And that applies to everything. And in fact, it's causing social problems because people are losing jobs because machines can do them. That's good and that's bad. It's bad because it's hard for people. We've always had that problem. But it's also really good in that, wow, we're really wealthy. The things that we take for granted, other people didn't even exist, or they couldn't afford if it did. And nobody has any gratitude for that. It's always, well, I have a brand new Chevrolet, but that guy has a Mercedes, let's kill him. Because it's human nature. That's why, you know, if whether or not you're religious, there's a lot of wisdom. It took me a while to figure it out. In the 10 Commandments, there's thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's possessions. There are different translations, but thou shalt not covet. And I always wondered, how'd that make the top 10? Like, I get don't kill people. Okay, yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. Don't steal.
Your wife. Yeah, right. Your neighbor's wife.
Neighbor's wife, bad.
Yeah.
Don't covet. I always wondered how that got in there, but we're learning. It motivates people to do all the other things, no matter how good you have it. So here's the thing.
That's a great point.
Socialism, redistribution, require a surplus to steal. And we are creating larger surpluses such they can steal a lot and you don't notice it. When it comes to money printing, usually there's a standard against which it's held. It used to be gold, to name one of many examples. But gold and silver were the big ones. But right now, everybody's printing for the same reasons, and it's bipartisan. It's a race to the bottom. Printing money, and there are different ways to do it. For example, when I lower interest rates to near zero, that's just another form of printing money.
That's true. Yeah.
It's very politically popular. It's subtle enough that most of the population doesn't understand what you're doing to them because most people are both stupid and ill-educated, or in the case of our populace, intentionally miseducated. And so because everyone's racing to the bottom, and because we're so productive and everyone's living so well, it's worked. What is money really? And when will it crash? Money is trust. I spend a little piece of my time on this earth, also known as my life. It's all I've got, really. And I spend it doing something, presumably other than, well, no, I don't want to mention what I was thinking. Scratch that. I do something productive, and I want to store that productivity. And so I put it in this piece of paper, and there's trust. And as long as that trust is there, even if you're stupid to trust in it, remember that. As long as the trust is there, and this comes back to how we started the conversation on the handouts. As long as there's trust, as long as everyone accepts that the green piece of paper is the green piece of paper, the green piece of paper works. It's entirely psychological, especially if it's paper, because there's no actual value to it. I mean, with some other material object, there's presumably some intrinsic value, so less trust involved. This is raw trust. Why do we not want people to panic? Because among other things, that trust goes away. That's when you get runs on banks. That's when people suddenly notice, wait, what am I putting my trust in? And a lot of really bad things happen. I mean, that is quite literally how you get a Hitler.
Yeah.
And so we've had unprecedented surpluses with which to buy and manufacture fake trust. Everyone's in a race to the bottom. So there's not a real standard of objectivity, because right now, if you keep your currency really strong, it kills your exports. So everybody, to different degrees, is in a race to the bottom. We have normally been less stupid than everybody, and I mean until very recently. Everyone's like, China's going to take us over. Are you old enough to remember when Japan was going to take us over? Back in the 80s, everyone was like, Japan is going to take us over. They're going to rule everything. Yeah, they bought Pebble Beach at this price, and then we closed on it at that price. Hello.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's unprecedented in that everyone's in a race to the bottom, and electronic money permits negative interest rates, which is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you my money and pay you to hold on to my money. I don't get rent on my money. Well, like a black hole, the closer you get to the black hole, the less the laws of physics function. The closer we get to zero interest or negative, the less the laws of economics function.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? Here's the problem. It's like your 92-year-old Aunt Emma. She's been smoking cigars for 82 years, and she's got heart disease and cancer of various sorts. We all know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Which day? We don't know that.
Right.
So you balance it out. You got to have a cash reserve to buy things because we're going to have some deflation. At some point, they're going to inflate. They've been trying to. They just haven't been. They've actually been trying to inflate. They're going to inflate. They are going to print. It's going to happen. Why? Because that's the only way the government can pay its own debt.
Once you start printing, you can't.
They don't. They're not going to raise interest rates because that affects them.
Mm-hmm.
So we know what they're going to do. They can't openly, honestly default. What happens to countries that say, F it, we're not paying? Immediate crash. Why won't a politician do that? Because he can't blame it on the next guy. The object is to print, hoping that the music doesn't stop until the next guy's in the chair. So political nature is they're going to keep doing that. They're not going to cut spending. Spending is popular. If the Republicans, which they used to sort of kind of do this, but they learned not to because they lose elections, you can't compete against Santa Claus. The Democrats are about socialism. If you look at our national spending, it's mostly Democratic invented items. Mm-hmm. They talk about the military. It's about 10% of governmental spending. And frankly, I do think killing certain foreigners is something that needs doing. Mm. But if you look at Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, you can't take it back. You can't take it back. Yep. They riot. Mm-hmm. They're entitled. They've been taught in school. They have a right to it. Because if people can't believe themselves, I'm a mooch and a loser and a thief, they have to believe they're entitled for whatever reason. So you can't take the money back. You can't drop the spending. But what happens? Your supporters come to you for this election and say, well, thanks for the, whatever, extra pay as a union guy, Social Security, whatever it is. But, what have you done for me lately? Mm-hmm. And so you got to dish out more. It's the nature of politics.
That's it. And that's what's going to continue to happen. Like I said, once you start printing, you can't stop printing. It's not like you just cease quantitative easing or whatever that thing.
Lord Acton, Acton. All democracies die as soon as the populace realizes it can vote itself money. That's what we're doing. It's not going to stop. Nobody can stop it. Because if you run on a platform of austerity, you immediately lose the election. Yeah. So the only thing you can really run on is we'll be less stupid about bankrupting us.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a very good point.
So that's where we're going. We're going to have
No, I love it. Thanks for talking through that because that came up earlier and I wanted to kind of circle back to what is that a little bit more in depth. And there's just so much to that I thought it was important to touch on.
MMT is just, look, to believe something truly, truly, amazingly, mind-numbingly stupid, you got to have an Ivy League degree. Mm-hmm. You got to be an intellectual. Normal common sense people don't believe stuff that's really stupid on its face. You got to be an intellectual to believe that stuff.
Yeah, you have to make it complex, right?
Yeah. I got a theory that works in my head and nowhere else. And then, so what they do is they start with the verdict. Well, we want to spend a lot of money. Well, we need a theory to justify it. Oh, I know, MMT. I mean, is it coincidence that it's not Austrian School of Economics people, but a bunch of left-leaning economists like Krugman who are saying, yeah, MMT, that's our new justified theory. So what do I recommend? What do I see my clients doing? Because my clients are much better investors than I am. Here's my advantage. I see a lot. Mm-hmm. A lot of what you would pay to see, people pay me to look at.
That's good. That makes sense.
With their books and their returns. So I see a lot of smart people, smarter than me about investing. And I kind of tag along. I get the knowledge. A lot of people are in cash. A lot of people are making use of that debt within reasonable ratios. As you saw, mine's pretty conservative. Mm-hmm. because I don't want to be the guy. It's that balance. I don't want to go bankrupt,
Mhm.
but I do want to get rich by the government printing more money and paying my debt off for me.
Sure.
So you come up with your number. That'd be a great, just a call, just to talk about what's that number? How do we come up with that number?
Mhm.
I like mine, and right now I'm still small enough that I can still find things at that number, but I'm also very well connected. I see a lot through my clients. Look, that lien, those medical liens,
Yep.
easily hit that number. And I'm not borrowing for those right now. I may. It's an experiment. So I put X amount of money. This is the first time we're doing it. If it works for me the way it worked for them on their spreadsheets with their own money in the past, yeah, I think I can smell a line of credit in my future.
Sure.
But I would have stuff like a principal, like Puerto Rico is like Texas and Florida. Your personal residence is sacred. Nobody can take it except the government, which, by the way, the property taxes here are crazy low. They locked fair market value at 1957. That year, 1957, the fair market value on your property, which is one of the reasons they have revenue shortfalls here. So they have to try and make it up, and that's why they have a stupid high income tax, because they don't balance their tax system.
Yeah.
Property taxes here are very low. You have complete homestead protection if your deed is drawn up correctly. That one's going to be free and clear.
Mm.
Ain't going to be no debt on that one.
Yeah.
Got to see where I'm going?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And then when the inflation hits, start reading. Look at some of the blogs some of the guys who lived through inflation in Argentina wrote. These guys would take like a normal guy would take his paycheck and go buy furniture on the way home from work, so they had something tangible that would still be worth something tomorrow.
Wow.
I think we're going to have a hard time hitting that hyperinflation, but I think it'll be high enough that it'll erode the value. So I'll tell you what scares me: long-term notes. If I'm not looking to foreclose on that long-term note, I like non-performing notes because I can foreclose on a thing of value. I don't mind short-term debt because I've got limited exposure.
That makes sense.
I don't want to be a long-term lender.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
That does not interest me.
You want hard assets.
Or
Right.
access to them quickly.
Yeah.
I don't mind the liquidity of the short term, like these receivables. These things they're supposed to turn around in about 18 months. I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Interesting. So, okay. No, that's great. I think that's a good overview of where people are. I've heard some people say, yeah, I'm loading up on cash. I've heard other people say, well, I'm kind of going lower in my cash position. And to your point, I'm loading up on hard assets like gold or silver or precious metals or
what are the fallback? First, don't buy them in your IRA. It's stupid. I mean, the idea of the IRA and the 401k is to shelter you from income tax. Put your income producing assets in the IRA. Buy the gold and silver outside the IRA. Second, you're not allowed to have physical possession of gold or silver with an IRA. Now, there are a lot of ads that say otherwise. They're plain wrong. They're just demonstrably plain wrong. And we've seen less ads because I'm friends with a guy who's the national expert on that. Mm-hmm. And he started to kind of call these people out and go after them and talk about the liability.
They're drying up.
Yeah, it's drying up. So I like gold and silver. And for the same reason, I like crypto. Different dynamic, but I like crypto for the same reason. Crypto is all about, we don't trust the government. I trust an algorithm more than I trust the government, which makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
So crypto, gold, similar function, except the crypto is more portable.
Okay. That makes sense. This is interesting. I think this is the things people need to realize. I was at a conference this past week and this debate raged on like, where do you put your money? Some people said, like you said, just load up on cash because it'll devalue a couple percentage points over the next couple of years, but I'm ready to buy a property, a house.
If we follow the normal pattern, look, right now, we are in the process of cash becoming more valuable. And the government will do anything to avoid deflation, anything. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're printing. And eventually, that'll prevail. I'll give you an example, just a very simple day-to-day example. It's selective. We know real estate's gotten more expensive. Some of that's, though, because of regulation. Some of that's tariffs. Some of that's people are more efficient in cities, like it or not, which COVID's kind of playing havoc with that whole model. But I don't know that that'll be permanent. People are naturally much more efficient in tight groups, mm-hmm. right? 1,000 doctors spread in 100 villages will get way less done in terms of creativity and inventing than the same number of doctors in one city. It's just how humans function, unfortunately, because I don't like the results of cities. I think cities, they go socialist, and you have mobs, and mobs have a mind of their own, or actually a lack of a mind of their own, and do dangerous things, including politically. Mm-hmm. I think we're in deflation. An example, and it is selective. Some things are not deflating. I'll give you an example though. We cook a lot. So I bought Wusthof knives, which I almost never see on sale at 50% off online. Brand new from, I forget where it was, one of those outfits. I bought Le Creuset, which I probably mispronounced. Sorry to the French people out there. Benoit perhaps. This very well-known, expensive French cast iron cookware that does cook things perfectly. If I'm going to get fat, it better be cooked perfectly and good.
Fair point.
That's where I'm with the French. They know how to live and eat. So I bought that cookware. I've never seen that discounted, ever. And that was like 20 to 30% off, which is unheard of. So we're seeing deflation in a lot of things. I don't think we're seeing it in real estate. Now, let's do some correlations. You know, I was just talking to my kids about why tuition in houses are so expensive. Well, the government subsidizes cheap money in the form of subsidized loans that are artificially cheap and artificially subsidized for both education and housing. It's not a coincidence that both of those things have become more expensive because we have inflated those little economies selectively. And so, because they were wondering why their compassionate, caring professors who are all about equality keep taking more money. Because they can.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We could go on, but it's,
no. It's good. It's an interesting time. You do wonder about what happens to the dollar in the next 2-3 years. What happens to our currency? I think the world reserve currency, as the U.S. dollar is shrinking, it's from like 60.
I don't know about that yet. Let me ask you a question. What are you going to replace it with? China?
It's not going to happen for a long, long time, if it ever happens.
No. Here's the issue. It's human emotion that's like an avalanche. When does that little pebble move that causes the avalanche, and who does the avalanche crush? I'll give you a great historical example. I can give you patterns. I can't give you exact things, but it's about the timing. And you'll have to know it when you see it. Nobody would have thought that some unheard of third-rate heir to a third-rate empire's throne getting whacked in a fourth-rate country in 1914 would have led to the First World War, millions and millions and millions of death, utter change of the political landscape, fascism, communism, massive inflation, war socialism in the U.S. Who would have thought that the Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting shot in, I think it was Sarajevo, would have led to all that? But that was the pebble. So at some point, and that's why they're printing the money and handing it out. They don't want that pebble to move.
Yep.
I don't want that pebble to move.
No, none of us do, right?
The opportunity, but also a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And so you'll kind of know, can I predict when the pebble's going to move? No. And so you allocate. I need a certain amount in cash. I need a certain amount in gold, assuming you have enough that you can allocate. Like some people are like, well, no, I spend everything. And so my allocation is I fed my face yesterday and I'm waiting for the next check. All right, well, the good news is allocation's not an issue for you.
Sure.
But in terms of allocating wealth, yeah, you want to sit on some pretty nice sized chunks of cash. There are things coming. To the extent that you can borrow and it is at a ratio that meets your satisfaction. And it's a little circular because the low interest makes borrowing or renting money attractive, but it drives asset prices up and makes it harder to sustain a good loan.
Yeah.
You got to be, here's where it's easier for us as small people. It's a lot easier to get a 20% return on 100 grand than it is on 3 billion.
That's true. Yeah.
So an environment where rifle shooting matters, and this is that environment, which asset do I buy that I can refi with cheap money artificially so the government pays the debt off, but that asset still pays for itself twice over? That's a rifle shooting competition. That ain't no shotgunning. I think the hedge funds are going to have a hard time doing it. Now their response is, well, we're getting money at 2%, so F you, we can invest in whatever we want.
Right. No, that makes sense. There's a question here about how much do you recommend as far as cash reserve as a multiple of monthly expenses?
I can't give you a generalization. I'll tell you what makes me feel comfortable. I like to have 1 year solid cash of my yearly expenses conservatively calculated. In other words, I'll calculate what I normally spend in a year and I want a little bit more than that in cash.
Okay.
But also let's bear in mind, for example, I shouldn't say this, it's bad operational security, but I am a prepper. I'm also very well armed and very willing to use the armament. So we do put aside a year's worth of food, and all sorts of other sundries. I believe in, to quote, what was his name? The guy at survivalblog.com. I forget his last name, Jim something. I believe in redundant redundancy.
Okay.
So you buy wheat from the LDS. It's the cheapest place to buy wheat that'll last 30 years. There's nothing that competes with those guys. They're really doing a service. And if you actually talk to them, they'll tell you they do it as it's service. They're trying to give. I really respect the heck out of that. So you buy a bunch of wheat. We actually use it. We make our own bread. You can buy bread machines at garage sales for $10 a pop. I got 4 of them.
Make plenty of bread.
Yeah, $40. Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, I eat homemade stuff made from something fairly decent. All right, it's not perfectly organic or whatever, but it is pretty high quality. So bottom line, my prepping is sort of an expensive hobby if we're lucky. And if we're not lucky, it suddenly became a very good investment.
Right. Best investment you will have ever made.
Free and clear house, prep, a year's worth of cash. A couple, again, vary the portfolio. Some of it's leveraged. Some of it's free and clear and provides enough that, look, somebody's got to rent it. They got to pay me something. It's not cross-collateralized. I'm not going to lose it. So a couple free and clear rentals or something similar that produces consistent income. What do I like about the rentals? Someone's got to live somewhere. What do I hate about the rentals? If you've got them in a place, they can't be moved. So the communists can come get it. So you really need to be in Findlay, Ohio, or somewhere where that's less likely to happen.
That's a great point. Yeah. That's a great point. Now, this is interesting, man. This has been wide-ranging, a lot of interesting information. We went from modern monetary theory through COVID to living in Puerto Rico and ending with prepping, which I'll be honest, I've come around on that. I mean, even just toilet paper. I want a lot more toilet paper than I've ever wanted before for some reason.
That's a lot of people's recent introduction to prepping.
That's true. It really is. And I've met a lot of guys. So I'm a member of this group, you may be familiar with, called GoBundance. It's a mastermind of guys that have a certain net worth or whatever. And the guys at the very top of that food chain, 8-9-figure net worths, all preppers, 100% preppers, like nutty preppers, bunker type preppers, right? So there's something to it. And when smart guys that have done really, really well, you included, continually kind of go back to that. And, I know there's the theory of like, you're clung to your guns and, it's like, there's reasons for all of this. And even my wife recently made this comment when it came to some of the COVID legislation, the COVID executive orders in place in Michigan, the ones that are coming out. She's like, I just got the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So
let me close on a preppy note.
Sure.
First of all, going back to Germany, nobody in Germany in 1914 thought that in 4 years they'd be starving and overrun by Reds. Nobody thought that in 35 years the Soviets would be taking half their territory and driving people in the dead of winter across plains on a horse cart. History happens. The Germans in 1914, the only country that could compete with them was us. In terms of tech, in terms of Nobel Prizes, wealth, things change. And you just can't always predict when, and it's not always predictable. Also, and there's one other, and I just ADD'd it. There was one other quick point I wanted to make, and it went away. Will it come back? Will it?
Prepping.
It was a preppy point.
Germany.
Oh, yes. Paranoia. See, prepping is related to paranoia. And just remember, paranoia is a great survival trait and a terrible happiness trait. And you have to be able to compartmentalize it. And that's the issue with some of the preppers. Right? What about Portillo's chocolate cake? That stuff needs to be canned and it needs to last 30 years. We can't have no Portillo's chocolate cake, but it's the chili dogs. I mean, come on, it's the dogs. So no, paranoia, to close on this, is a great survival trait. What is paranoia? I think of every situation, no matter how unlikely. In fact, I think about it a lot. Why do those people survive? Sometimes that situation happens and you're ready. Why is it not a happiness trait? Because you make everyone miserable while you're thinking of all that.
Sure.
You got to think about it, but then you got to put it away in another compartment and be happy and grateful. And then when you need to, you open up the compartment. So just a thought on prepping. I think it makes a lot of sense given that this world is full of a lot of uncertainty right now.
It's true. No, it's very true. And I think that's really, really well said for those that may, I think more people are coming around to it like other things like meditation and yoga, same thing. People are coming around to it more than they ever have in the past. And it's, there's a good reason for it. So
I get in trouble with my wife on yoga. She's been telling me for years I need to do it. And I have this thing I say to her, I'm about to repeat it. She's not in the room right now, but it really pisses her off. I wouldn't do it for years. I wouldn't do it for years. And then a buddy of mine, a retired military guy, in other words, a man.
Yeah, yeah.
And a manly man, not like a guy that we're kind of wondering about. Hey, so no, he's like, it's done wonders for my lower back. So I did it, and I came home, and I'm like, this feels great. If only someone would have told me.
My wife says that to me all the time. Like, if I say it, you don't do it. If Ben says it, you do it. I'm like, oh.
If you own it and you tell them, if only someone would have told me.
Yeah.
It does not help your life expectancy, but good Lord, it is fun.
End of days for you. John, thank you.
Here's what we'll do. Next time, we honest to God, we'll pick a tax topic and stick to it.
No, this was good. I just want to redirect to taxreductionlawyer.com. Check out his website. Check out that webinar. A bunch of great information on there. This was just fun. I thought this was amazing. We had a lot of great topics that we talked about. A lot of things I wanted to get into, and then you brought up stuff that was like, man, we got to go there, So I appreciate it. It's good. I'm ADD myself. Poor Ben over there is like logic, to the point, straight. That's not me. That's why we make a good partnership. But
that's why it works.
That's right. But John, thank you so much for tonight. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for jumping on tonight. John, I hope you have a great one and enjoy the fine weather and fine cuisine of Puerto Rico.
Indeed. You guys take care. Good night.
We'll see you. Thank you.